lost private. We're in Normandy.
Thanks for checking in here at the We're Not Lost Private podcast. We appreciate all your support. But do you know how else you can support us? By signing up at Patreon. For $3 a month, you'll have access to all of our episodes, plus access to all kinds of bonus material, like our quarterly newsletter, photographs, and official paperwork, and research that goes into each and every show. You can follow the pod on a multitude of platforms such as YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, pretty much anywhere you catch your pods. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon. Welcome, everybody, to episode 35 of the We're Not Lost Private podcast. It's great to have you here. You do a lot of research for shows, and I originally had started working on a show that I teased about in episode 34 on Le Durier, on D-Day and D+1. It needed a little bit more work. I was ready to unroll it, but it's not going to happen right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about another subject right after I send out a brief thank you to Stephen and James for joining the Patreon team. Thank you so much, guys. And thank you to Andrew for following along on YouTube and all my other new YouTube subscribers. Thanks so much, everybody. I'll do my best to keep bringing you quality product. One of the things that dawned on me when I was doing the episode 34, when I started researching some Wilmington stuff, obviously it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart because I have family down there. But living in Fredericksburg, Virginia, I didn't really do a lot of research on my current hometown. And so I decided I needed a show to fill in the gap before Le Durier was ready. And I figured something natural like a show on Fredericksburg and its relationship to World War II. And while Fredericksburg was kind of like one of your other, little normal towns out there that are just kind of, fortifying itself for the war and things of that nature, one of the things that I found out about when I was digging was it was also a training ground or a field testing ground for OSS operatives. For those of you who don't know the background, OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, is the forerunner of the modern CIA. They were much more focused on field operations at the time, along with intelligence gathering. And as we get through the show, I'll explain some of the other background to it. But operative trainees were sent to Fredericksburg to Fredericksburg would replicate a target city, and the operatives would go in and collect information. And they'd have to do so in a way that made them look like they were just normal people that lived in that town. I had no idea that this occurred. In doing some research, I spotted some photographs of armed U.S. soldiers and militia guarding key locations like the bridge over the Rappahannock River and other places. And I thought that was really interesting. So the more I kept digging, and I found out this information about operative trainees working in Fredericksburg. The first name when I started researching trainees that might have done these kinds of activities in Fredericksburg was a gentleman by the name of Edgar Prichard. And we'll get to Edgar, but he's kind of the linchpin to this story because I used him as my focal point, my start point, to develop the story out for this particular show. With that said, when you're talking about the Office of Strategic Services, you have to talk about its founder, William Wild Bill Donovan. And the OSS was obviously a very new organization. And I'm going to bring some slides up because I did some prep work on this, and I want everybody for those of you that are viewing it on, YouTube, to be able to see these while I go through the information. But we're going to just go through some of these slides, and we're going to talk about the early development and training for OSS operatives, and then how this relates to Edgar Prichard, and then we'll bring it back home to Fredericksburg, and then when we're done, we'll kind of put a bow on Edgar and his career. One of the interesting things is, and I apologize up front, as much searching as I could do, Edgar Prichard is like a phantom on the internet. And I put a request into the National Archives for his OSS trainee file. I have not received it yet, but in that he's like a mystery man. At some point, I was going to place a placeholder for him as a picture and use one of those spy versus spy clip arts from the old comic book. But I thought that just kind of did a disservice to him. So we're just going to talk about him. And unfortunately, for those of you viewing this, I don't have a picture of him. But we'll get right into talking about Donovan. And as you can see, for those of you that are watching this, the Office of Strategic Services was established by presidential military order issued by President Roosevelt on June 13th, 1942. Its mandate was to collect and analyze strategic information required by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and to conduct special operations not assigned to other agencies. And that's a key piece of information right there, because there are a lot of other intelligence agencies across the Department of the Defense at the time, the various services, and the government. But by special mandate, the OSS becomes an intelligence arm of the United States government and the military. And again, Donovan was already a made man, self-made man. He was a World War I hero, a Medal of Honor. He had come back. He was a businessman. He had made money, so he was wealthy. He was also very much an out-of-the-box thinker, and he was also characterized as a terrible administrator. But he wanted people with varying skill sets, people that could perform skullduggery. And one of his quotes that I thought was very telling in that regard is he wrote, "Espionage is not a nice thing, nor are the methods employed exemplary. Neither are demolition bombs nor poison gas. We face an enemy who believes one of his chief weapons is that he will employ terror, but we will turn terror against him." And I thought that was pretty amazing quote when you think about it. He had no qualms about fighting dirty. Now, many of you early on, when you think about American participation in the war, is very much a kind of gentlemanly, right? And the British, working alongside the British who fought as gentlemen, this kind of warfare, to the normal conventional warrior would be almost distasteful for them. But the British were also very much the forefathers for this type of intelligence work and that skullduggery. But they didn't take a good view of our earlier embryonic form of the OSS, and they called the OSS the glorious amateurs, which is the way they viewed us. And we very much were amateurs. The OSS was very much amateurs at that point. But you know, Donovan had a vision of how he wanted to operate, and he wanted people who could get the job done. And they didn't necessarily have to look like soldiers or be soldiers, but that was the recruiting pool at first. But he also stated at one point, "I'd put Stalin on the OSS payroll if I thought it would help defeat Hitler." Again, another insightful quote from him and how he approached the problem set. But how do we get to how does Prichard, factor into all this? So he's just another recruit, right? He's born in Brockton, Montana. He attends University of Tulsa and later on the University of Oklahoma. After Pearl Harbor, he enlists in February of 42 in Montana. He's 22 years old. He's got about 3 years of college. He's multilinguist. He spoke English, Spanish, and French. And he was trained as a clerk, but he was very bored with this job. Like he didn't find it very fulfilling. He was a product of higher education. He was he had some ambition. He wanted to help his country win the war. At one point, his company first sergeant recommended that he try out for a special detached service. And when Prichard inquired as to what detached service was, the first sergeant explained to him, you're away from your unit, you're assigned to another outfit, but they don't really own you, and you're there for a finite piece of time, period of time, and then you come back. But the special part at the front end of that detached service was what really interested him. So he put his application in and he was interviewed by the base intelligence officer where he was stationed, who asked him if he would like to volunteer for interesting duty. And Prichard was all in. He was issued special orders and he was sent to Washington, D.C., where he was posted as part of the coordinator of information, which is also another arm of the OSS. He was further assigned to the Special Operations Branch and sent to a secret camp for training. Before he was deployed to those camps, he was told, write letters to your family and friends, tell them you're not going to be available because you're going to be on special duty and you're not going to be able to correspond with them frequently or until the war is concluded, which he did. Now, for training, the two primary training areas were in Virginia and Maryland. You had William Forest Park in Chappaquamsick, which was the advanced course. It was called Area A, and then you had the B course or Area B, which is your basic course for OSS operatives, and that was in the Catoctin Mountain Park. These are the two primary places where they were trained. Catoctin's in Maryland, and Chappaquamsick's in Virginia near the Triangle. For those of you that don't know, the camps opened up in April of 1942, and Prichard was one of the first trainees to be assigned, and he went to the B course. He said when he was asked about his fellow trainees, he said it was an interesting lot, uh, indicating that there were people from lots of different backgrounds, special backgrounds. He gets there in May of 42, and as he checks in, they direct him, and he knows, he looks at the camp right away, and it's a very Spartan camp. Had little huts for the trainees to stay in, an administration building, an armory. But again, very Spartan, very rustic. So he gets in there, and they point him to his uh, hut where he's supposed to place his gear and pick a cot. The cadre tells him, go and pick a cot, take put your gear up and get ready. We'll post the training schedule. And he walks into his hut, and the first thing he sees is a rat. And he had happened to be carrying a 38 caliber revolver in a shoulder holster, and he pulled out the revolver and quickly fired off a shot, and he winged the rat, who scampered out of the hut. Well, one of his instructors came over, a captain who was on the staff, and confiscated his 38 from him. He was pretty pissed off that he was firing his firearm in the camp, inside one of the huts. So he confiscates the 38 and basically orders him to start breaking down his gear and getting ready for training. And they post up the schedule, and it's going to be it's a 4-week course. It's designed to prepare the trainees for hazardous missions, which include sabotage, guerrilla leadership, armed and unarmed close combat technique, including silent killing, and other aspects of unconventional warfare behind enemy lines. And right away, Prichard is enthralled with this, the idea of conducting these kinds of operations. Now, in order to do this, they had to recruit instructors to take part, to train all these neophytes. These neophyte spies, saboteurs, guerrilla leaders, radio operators, psychological warfare specialists, commando teams, you name it. They were all filtering through these camps, these training camps. Uh, they When the trainees showed up, it was deliberately lax in terms of military standards and bearing. And they did that to see how these new trainees would operate within the framework of the OSS training organization. The different classes, and they wanted to see, it was as much as it was a training exercise, it was also kind of a social experiment. They didn't have any saluting, no close order drill, no bugle, no marching to class or anything like that. Each trainee was treated like an adult and expected to perform like an adult. Each area, they had sub areas within the training camps, within A and B areas, and each one of them had a chief training instructor, and then each sub area had its own training cadre. These guys kept the camps running while the trainees cycled through the training regimen. They had officers and enlisted, so it was mixed. One of the most famous and probably well remembered instructors was a British Army captain by the name of William Fairburn. And for those of you looking at this on YouTube, you can see the quote about Fairburn. He was self-taught expert in unconventional hand-to-hand combat. He learned while a police officer in Shanghai fighting organized crime and street thugs. It was there he invented with Eric Anthony Sykes the Fairburn Sykes stiletto used by British commandos, the OSS, and other special operations units to this day, including the Rangers. Those of you who caught my Rangers show about the formation of the 1st Ranger Battalion and their actions in North Africa, I talked a little bit about the Fairburn Sykes stiletto that was carried by many of the Rangers. In addition to that special hand-to-hand, that unarmed combat training, Fairburn created a House of Horrors, which was a building in Area B that had darkened rooms and contained confusing sounds, flashing bulbs, pop-up targets, and a trainee had to race through the course firing at the targets. The trainees were graded on their firing accuracy as they went through it. Herbert Brucker, who was a fellow trainee with Edgar Prichard, went through the 45 caliber automatic pistol in his hand, and he was tall and lean. He was 21 years old, and he had 2 magazines, 12 rounds total. And behind him, just out of sight line, was a man in a mask. It was a nerve-wracking drill, he remembered, and most trainees dreaded it. I don't know which was scarier, the spook house or Fairburn. Fairburn was the man in the mask who was behind them grading him. Even though his name wasn't Dan, they called him Dangerous Dan. And he's the one who created that obstacle course, essentially, which is the forerunner for for any of you who are listening who have been through a lot of the different shoot houses. This was basically the forerunner of all the shoot houses that we even use up to today. Um, Brucker, back to Brucker, as he went through the course, he'd been trained to fire twice and keep moving at each target. So he must have hit his targets and the 5 more that confronted him in the darkness, because he survived the House of Horrors, which is what the trainees nicknamed it, even though it featured like cardboard Nazis in it. And again, the flashing bulbs, all meant to disorient the trainee as they went through. And then you had to go through it at a select period of time, and you had to hit all your targets. So obviously, Brucker made it through, as did Prichard. Another famous instructor there but was a man by the name of Jerry Sage. For those of you with Special Forces background, that last name will be very familiar to you. You can see there, Sage said, "My duties were to indoctrinate the new recruits, who were everything from jailbirds to college professors, and teach them the fundamentals of soldiering and physical conditioning." Remember, I talked about the backgrounds, and that Donovan was less enamored with your soldierly background so much as whether or not you had skills that he could utilize to get the job done. Sage was born in Canada and raised in Indiana. At 24, he joined the OSS. He had been working for Procter and Gamble before the war kicked off, and he joined the U.S. Army, and he was stationed at Fort Lewis, where he came to the attention of a number of senior officers. He was a very adept trainer of men. Even though he was young and early in his career, he still was very adept at training. And that made its way all the way to Bill Donovan. And he traveled all the way to Washington, D.C. to be interviewed by Donovan. Seated behind the desk was an imposing, somewhat heavy-set man, not as tall as I, but with good shoulders. He had piercing, delft blue eyes. His gaze did not waver for an instant. Sage must have impressed Donovan, because he was accepted in the OSS, and he was sent out to Canada, to British Columbia, to a British SOE camp for his initial training. The British trainers were so enamored with him, they tried to recruit him for the SOE, and they nicknamed him Dagger. Not wanting to basically go back on what he felt was a binding contract between him and the U.S. government, he went back to OSS as a trainer, and he trained recruits at areas A and B. After a set period of time as a trainer, he deployed as well to North Africa with the OSS, and he was later captured during operations against the Germans and the Italians. He conducted 15 escape attempts from German prisoner of war camps, including early participation in the mass escape at Stalag Luft 3, which obviously, for those of you who are World War II movie buffs, ended up becoming the Great Escape. And it was said that Steve McQueen's character was based on Jerry Sage. Because he had so many escape attempts and was recaptured, he was oftentimes put into solitary, where he got another nickname, Cooler King. He's considered one of the forebearers of modern special forces, and the 2-week unconventional warfare graduation course known as Robin Sage is partially named after him. Again, the folks with special forces backgrounds that are following along on the pod will recognize that name. He ended up retiring a colonel. So how does this circle back around with Prichard and Fredericksburg? Before Prichard deploys, one of his graduation exercises is to go down to Fredericksburg with a fellow trainee by the name of Scott Lockwood and conduct intelligence gathering operations in town. And I found this hysterical when I started reading about it, because some of the areas that he talked about, they still exist to this day, and in some cases are largely unchanged. So it's really interesting to have an OSS connection to the town you live in. In this case, they sent him down there in late 42 to do, or midsummer 42 to do probe the city's security, essentially, as part of their training exercise. They had forged documents and posed as free French patriots. He and 2 others went to visit the city manager and came away with complete information on Fredericksburg: the water supply, the electrical supply, the telephone system, the labor force, and all the factories that were located in Fredericksburg at that point. Prichard said of his time in Fredericksburg, "Scotty Lockwood and I posed as fishermen. We bought fishing gear and sought out the reservoir. We pretended to fish, but we never caught a damn thing. We discovered that there was a small electric plant there on top of the dam. We found a way to enter the power plant from below by crawling through the inside of the dam. We located the generators. As I recall, there were only 2 or 3. We put chalk marks on them, and we figured out how we would blow up the power station and the dams. Others went around to the telephone central office and some of the other firms in town. There wasn't much we didn't know about Fredericksburg by the end of the day." This is hysterical when you think about it. They just go in with this light cover of, I'm just a fisherman. I'm here in town. They talk to the city manager. Now you got to remember, it's 42. The United States is on a war footing. The city manager is giving away all this information, and nobody is stopping them as they go through this critical infrastructure here in town. I mean, this is pretty amazing when you think about the audacity. And nobody knows if I never found during my research whether or not the city leadership of Fredericksburg was forewarned that these men would be operating in their town. I mean, nowadays you have to inform law enforcement. I remember a couple of years back, very sad case of a special forces trainee at Robin Sage being shot by a local law enforcement. Uh, Typically you coordinate with the local area, whether it's the civilian leadership or the military leadership, so that there aren't accidents like that. To think that these guys just waltzed into town posing as fishermen and then going to visit the city manager is pretty amazing when you think about it. But that was the hallmark of the OSS. I mean, the audacity in which they operated. Uh, a lot of times successful, a lot of times unsuccessful. It was a lot of trial and error when you think about it. So once Prichard graduates, they deploy him to North Africa. First, he starts in Algeria, and then he ends up later in Cairo, where he supports OS operations in Bulgaria and Greece. He's part of a communications team running out under Lieutenant James Rainey, who was a former instructor at one of the training areas. And the site had powerful transmitters, and they relayed messages between OSS headquarters and agents in the field. When you think about like Jedburghs and things of that nature, the deployed Jedburgh teams, this is how they were transmitting information to them. The folks that follow how the OSS and the Jedburgh teams operated in France prior to D-Day. This is similar, where the broadcasts go on and give them their instructions on how to operate. And this site that Prichard worked at was one of those that was broadcasting into that area. They also broadcasted for forces in the Balkans and Eastern Europe, so they had wide coverage. You can imagine how strong these transmitters were, even back in World War II. These are 400 to 500 watt transmitters, and they had massive antennas, rhombic and wave antennas. One of them, Randy remembered, was 3,000 feet long. The antenna, pretty amazing size to be stationed in Cairo, and I wonder what kind of security they had around the site. And I never did find anything about it. But it's interesting. While he was working there, Prichard, he meets a fellow OSS operative by the name of Nancy McCandish, and they hit it off. And Nancy's from Fairfax, Virginia, and their romance continues through the war. And after the war, they settle in Fairfax, and they're married. Prichard goes into law, into law. He studies to become a lawyer, and then in his post-war career, he's tremendously a successful man. He helps establish George Mason University. He becomes the mayor of Fairfax. I mean, and he's a litigator for a long time, a very successful litigator. And he's essentially one of the founding fathers of Fairfax and George Mason University, and a real staunch supporter of the expansion in Virginia. He uh, helps the town of Reston essentially be formed and build out. So he's really important to the Northern Virginia expansion post World War II. So it's pretty amazing to find out about Prichard and his roles here in the Virginia area after the war is over. And again, all this just stemmed from doing some research about Fredericksburg and its role during World War II. It doesn't take much to deep dive and start finding out these great pieces of information, and it's pretty amazing that all the things that Prichard did. And if memory serves, he and Nancy had three children, uh, two boys, one girl. His daughter became a doctor, and his two sons became ministers. And then, as far as I know, still live up. I think his daughter lived in Richmond for some time, and the sons live up here, and one lives in Pennsylvania, I think. But I mean, it's a pretty amazing career he had, all at starting at 22 years old, and being emboldened by the attack on Pearl Harbor. He finishes up his semester and basically joins the army right away. And then, in a fit of boredom, essentially takes this offer to go work on special detached duty. That's pretty amazing that how it happens. It happened for him, uh, and I just thought that was pretty amazing. And I decided just to we'll get together a fairly quick episode, and we'll just go over some of this stuff. We'll talk about some OSS, some of these legends like Fairburn and Sage, and how they impacted, and obviously Donovan, and how they form the basis for what would become the modern CIA. But that's it. I'm going to wrap it up for now. I'm already a little bit too long-winded on this particular uh, topic, and I just want to thank everybody for stopping by and taking part in and listening to this pretty interesting, as far as I'm concerned, interesting topic when you think about it. And I encourage everybody, do a little research on your own hometown, see what you can find out, because you might not know who lives nearby or what piece of history occurred. So do some research. The internet's your friend. Do some research and find out what happened around your own area, because you can uncover some stuff, and then you could visit different sites. But thanks again, everyone, for checking in. Thanks again to Steve and James for joining the team. Much appreciated. And I look forward to seeing everybody again. Take care.